Someone asked if we can, if I can post the link. Absolutely, we'll post the link. We can put it into the chat, and then also add it to the Revolutionary Learning Club, Revolutionary Learning community. This is some poetry written by the late 19th, early 20th century West African scholar Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, one of those moral and ethical and spiritual Sufi leaders that was at the forefront of resistance to European occupation. In the case of Bamba, his resistance to go to Art's question and to a broader question that we had yesterday was nonviolent. It was a nonviolent resistance that was dictated by the circumstances being that the French were able to inflict literally hundreds of thousands of casualties upon resistance fighters while suffering almost no casualties of their own in the late 19th century occupation of the African continent. For example, at the Battle of Durman in the Sudan in 1898, mid-September 1898, in a single morning, the British occupation forces inflicted almost 30,000 casualties and suffered only 200 from their own soldiers. Those 200 were almost all Egyptian auxiliaries who were used as the fighting force in the occupation of the Sudan. And so, under those circumstances, leaders like Bamba took the option, and this is important for understanding our contemporary moment as well. While we will never demonize anyone who picks up arms to resist, neither will we demonize people who choose not to take up arms. In the circumstances of Islamic legal principles, and this is also the legal principles that H Group in Gaza reasons under, is that if the casualties that are being inflicted upon you reach a certain proportion, you have the right, if you so choose, to sue for peace. So that is to say that we have a responsibility to resist, but we also have the right to negotiate. It is a thing that is within the people's discretion. And if Hamas decides that tomorrow they want a peace treaty, then that is for the resistance to decide. That is at the core of self-determination, is to understand that the right to choose to fight and that the right to choose for peace is entirely in the hands of the people who make those decisions. And that is what is at the core of self-determination. And it's a good place to start today because I don't want us to emerge from this conversation centered around Fanon, reproducing a fetish for violent revolution. Nonviolent revolution is always preferred, but we know it is not always possible. Bamba, the poet, whose words you were just listening to, ended up spending 27 years of his life under house arrest from the French colonial occupation. He was taken into custody in 1895 and lived for 7 years, 9 months on an island off the coast of Gabon, 1,500 miles away from his home in exile. And for the first year and a half of that time, he was the only prisoner on an island. It was some like literal Count of Monte Cristo, Man in the Iron Mask type stuff. If you're a fan of Alexander Dumas, I just outed myself as a hardcore black nerd. Um, but all of that is to say is that under circumstances of occupation, Bamba chose a nonviolent path, and he resisted with his pen, he resisted with culture, he resisted with movement building. And the movement that he built is the movement that socialized me when I went to West Africa for the first time in 1996. That was the community that welcomed me. That was the community that taught me what resistance culture looks like. And that was the community that healed me by using the cultural and spiritual resources of this African tradition to undo a lot of the harm that white supremacy had done to me. It was the beginning of making myself into a person again and developing the resources of consciousness that are necessary in order to stand up and fight, because the fight will sometimes require us knuckling up. And other times it will require us standing down. And sometimes a negotiation that looks like a defeat is the greatest victory. The Muslims that are present will immediately think of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, where a negotiated treaty looked like it was a humiliation for the Muslims, but it turned out leading to their greatest victories. The point is, we resist, and we resist with everything that is inside us and all of our cultural and spiritual resources. And that is where we are going to jump into the conversation today. You can see that I'm starting off fast. We're going right into the deep end of the pool because I've been knowing y'all for a while now, at least since yesterday for some of y'all, and for some of y'all many years longer than that. So we're not going to stand on ceremony. Let's get right into it. We're going to come back to Fanon to start because I know we're going to have plenty of questions today, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions. Bracket the conversation that we just had about culture and resistance, because that's where we're going to end up in a moment. Let's get back into the text from Fanon. So first of all, I'm going to I'm going to enlarge the gallery so I can see how many people raised their hands and how many people ducked the question. How many people got around to reading some Fanon last night? All right, good. Now, if you raise your hand in my classroom, then that means that you are liable to be called upon at any time. I just hit the unmute button for, is it Chayla?
Yeah. Expecting that, but yes.
So, what were some of the things that hit you the hardest or takeaways that you might have had? Sorry to put you on the spot, but if you're in my
Okay,
classroom, it can happen.
that's all right. I have my notes here. Um, and I took notes the way you said. I thought it was really interesting, like that colonized individual, the that colonized elite, how yeah, so many examples of that. How kind of the role that they play, like a really critical role. And one thing that was interesting was it was talking about like some of the values that that person has kept from the colonizer, such as individualism. And so it was talking about like the importance of this colonized intellectual like really getting like boots on the ground, like in the struggle with their community, to like that's really the only way to kind of undo some of that, including individualism. And it was interesting because it talked about how like one of the first ways is with like vocabulary that they learn, like calling each other brother, sister, comrade. So that was super interesting to me.
Outstanding and a wonderful place for us to start. Now, how many of us that might have been educated in, Western academic institutions felt personally targeted by the way that, elite intellectuals were treated by Fanon? But it's a really, really important and critical call, and it goes to that question that we raised yesterday about the alienation from ourselves that is produced by colonial dynamics. And I want to just take this as a quick in. For me, the most interesting Marxist thinker that isn't also an African is Antonio Gramsci. And the reason is that Gramsci thoroughly understood and wrote very carefully about the role of intellectuals. He talked about intellectuals not being distinguished by the quality of their thought, but intellectuals as occupying a certain subject position inside society and within the dynamics of capitalism. So intellectuals play an interstitial position between the state authority and the people, and they're constantly in this position, like they're an isthmus or a barzakh. They face both directions, and they do the work of mediating and normalizing the language of the power structure and um, filtering that down to the people. They normalize and naturalize power. And when you realize that, and then you think about the conversation that we had yesterday about how the contemporary Democrat and Republican parties, the contemporary duopolies, They essentially function the same way that colonized intellectuals function in the colonial African society, is that they do this job of normalizing power and of making it disappear. And what Fanon is pointing us to is that this is only undone when you come down from that level of interpreting for the people the mandates and the culture that comes from on high, and instead embed yourselves in the people. And one of the crucial distinctions that he makes, and I can go to the slide because you it's like you were reading my mind here, if I can find it. And of course, I'm going to have trouble because I'm on a different computer than yesterday, but let's see. All right, can you guys see that? Okay, so in almost the exact same passage where Fanon says, "You will never make colonialism blush for shame by spreading out little known cultural treasures under its eyes," he talks about the way that colonized intellectuals will make a fetish of the people, but not be embedded in the people, that they approach the culture in a way that, to borrow our lingo from today, appropriates the people's culture rather than is embedded in it and a product of it. So this becomes, for Fanon, a kind of cultural exploitation that is usually operationalized by this bourgeoisie, by the native intellectual. And you saw this in plain display in the way that Kamala Harris, for example, deployed certain tropes about Black womanhood in order to try to get Black women tagged in to a white supremacist genocidal agent of the carceral state, that it appropriates the language and the culture and the symbolism of the people, but it is not in the people. It is a very particular kind of appropriation and manipulation. So for Gramsci, the revolutionary intellectuals, and you can hear the echoes of Gramsci in Fanon, is that the revolutionary intellectual abandons all of this pretense and abandons all of this performative nature. The culture of the people is not an artifact. It is not something to be utilized for nationalist rhetorical purposes. Culture is supposed to be a weapon of liberation. And that weapon of liberation is not made by making stale museum artifacts of the people's culture. Instead, uh, it's more like hip hop. It's more like taking the thrown away turntables and the thrown away records and the thrown away South Bronx and reconfiguring them in a way that none of the or a few of the early practitioners of the cultural elements that became hip hop, R&B, soul could recognize. It looked different, but it was an authentic expression of the people's struggle in the moment using those cultural tools. And anybody that understood the struggle immediately saw in hip hop that it was saying something, immediately had seen in jazz that it was saying something, immediately had seen in the blues that it was saying something. Today's session, if you haven't yet guessed it, is about revolutionary culture. It's about that poetic production that Bamba produced that is still healing human beings and orienting society in West Africa. It is about the moment that we are in and how we will resolve this tension that existed in the revolutionary moment of the 60s and the 70s between, do we have a revolutionary culture or do we have a cultural revolution? It was expressed in the tension between the Panthers and the US organization, for those that were there for the Panther Power seminar that we did in July. And the answer to the question is yes. We need to have a cultural revolution and a revolutionary culture. And these passages from Fanon are the beginning of our way into that conversation. For those of you who talk when confronted with conversations about organized religion or even spirituality, it's hard for you to hear that piece in your revolution. That is part of the culture of the people. That is part of what makes us healed. That is part of what makes us whole. The order of hands that I have, I've got Chris and then Afnan. Let me try that again.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really stood out to me is Fanon is speaking on the liberal
By the way,
contingents.
you guys are tapped in. Like this is good stuff. Y'all are going right to my notes. Go ahead. Sorry, Chris. Please continue.
And he says the liberal demands nothing more nor less than twofold citizenship. And when I read that, I thought immediately of the state of Israel and Palestine. And the question to me is, is a two-state solution possible? Like the idea that there is a two-state solution, or even the continuation of the state of Israel with their twofold citizenship. Does decolonialization demand that that be abolished?
Excellent question. I want to come back to the liberal into it, but I'll just answer the question first. Um, it is not, everybody, please try to remember this. However committed you may be to Palestinian liberation, it is for Palestinians to decide what Palestinian liberation looks like. If Palestinians decide that under the circumstances that a two-state solution is the solution that they want, that's their right, that's self-determination. We might not like it because we've decided that one state from the river to the sea with equal rights for all is the ideal set of circumstances, but it is not your decision. Your role is to support Palestinians in their efforts for self-determination. And some people put their ideological commitments over people's actual lives, over their actual liberation struggles. And that, to return to the earlier question, is the height of bourgeois individualism, because you sitting there from the outside have decided what solution you think is most appropriate. I try not to curse in these classes, but nigga, who cares? Who cares what you think? Since 1947, 1948, these are people that have been dispossessed, deprived of their sovereignty, had their self-determination ripped from them. If an intermediate solution that doesn't look like total emancipation to us is what Palestinians choose, then that is what Palestinians choose, and we support them in that. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's go to the question. And this is very, very important. My colleague here at UCSB, the brilliant and talented Amanda Joyce Hall, who really was a major reason, her scholarship on the rise of anti-apartheid student movements was very prescient for me because it allowed me to know what was coming in the Palestinian liberation student uprisings, because she had so carefully documented what happened in the anti-apartheid movement that I literally, could see steps before they were coming. But what Amanda reminded me of recently is that no matter which of the African or diasporic revolutionaries that you read, all of them describe liberals as ops. Zero exceptions. Kwame Ture, I'm forgetting now which book it's in. I can see myself reading it, but I can't see the cover. He said, of course, when the final confrontation comes, the liberal will be on the side of the oppressor. He says in that same volume that the liberal is the weakest of the oppressor class. He said, and that is why, to borrow today's lingo, they always punch down and never punch up. It's the reason why the Democrats always punch left and never punch right, except in performative culture war ways, but they never challenge the fundamental power or ideological rooting of the parties to their right. And that's why that ratchet effect, and it really is ratchet at this point. I'm sorry for the play on words there, but it really is ratchet at this point. That ratchet effect where the Republicans pull them to the right and then the Democrats fight off anything that comes from the left has objectively moved today's Democrat Party so far to the right of Ronald Reagan that Reagan today would be on the leftward fringe of the Democrat Party. And when you think about that and realize that, like, there may never have been a more black-hearted son of a bitch than Ronald Reagan, you realize how deep pit we are actually in. Do you guys know that there's like live mic moments where Ronald Reagan is talking with Richard Nixon about African dignitaries that were at the White House, and he said that it is their first time wearing shoes? That's Ronald Reagan. But Ronald Reagan, objectively, his version of trickle-down economics is significantly to the left of the Democrats' current conception of neoliberalism. Huey Freeman, Ronald Reagan is the devil. Oh man, now that would be actually fun. There's a lot of homophobia in the original Boondocks episodes, but otherwise, like that would be a great watch party. A great watch party for the class. Afnan, please jump in.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you again. Is it okay to also like mention what powerful to me, but also ask a question about what you just said?
Absolutely. Listen, so we're starting here in the conversational mode. I'm going to get to the stuff that I need, but the most important part of communication is to respond to the hearts that are present in the room. So ask what you need to ask, say what you need to say.
Thank you so much. I'll start with the question is because I did a political philosophy module and I read some of Rawls's work, and it seemed like it was about respect. But obviously I have interacted with liberals and yeah,
I'm
maybe
sorry,
there's some
you read
confusion
some
on
of
my end.
whose work? I missed it. Sorry.
Rawls,
Oh, okay, yeah,
RA, yeah.
got you.
And like, yes, I'm just confused, like, what's wrong with liberals? But apart from my personal experience with them, but like as a philosophy. But then two things that really spoke to me from what I read, is that it relates to what you were saying about education. That in Algeria, education obviously was introduced to as a tool of colonialism. And my granddad actually, because I have Algerian origin, he went to a French school with the French kids, and he told me about the apartheid in the education. And I was struck by around page 41 or that kind of area, the discussion on how the colonizer views the colonized.
Hmm.
And my granddad would tell me how, for example, when they're talking about the indoctrination, when they're talking about the Frenchman, he has these occupations, and then the Arab, oh, he's a beggar, he's this, he's that. Another thing was just the lucidity of Fanon's insight of obviously he passed away before even Algeria's independence, but he foresaw the kind of downfall of the FLN, the neo-colonial military coup, and the bloodshed. And around page 71, I was very struck by that.
Yeah. So excellent. I'll start there and then work our way back to liberals. We can keep coming back to liberals as is needed. So I mentioned yesterday that Fanon was the representative for the Algerian delegation to at least two separate Pan-African Congress meetings in Accra, Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah was the person who organized those. And Nkrumah wrote a book called Neocolonialism that I think comes out right around the time that Fanon dies. But the language of neocolonialism was already hardwired into the resistance fighters that were Pan-Africanists. And you can hear the echoes of this not just in the passages that you were discussing, Efnan, but also in the later chapter on nationalist consciousness, where Fanon is pointing to the shortcomings of nationalism as a solution to colonialism, because he is thinking as a Pan-Africanist. And he understands that there is a very real risk of what they called at the time the balkanization of the African continent. In other words, the division of the African continent into tiny client states rather than into large regional federations, which would make them easier to control. It was essentially a continuation of divide and conquer logic. So Fanon was not alone in thinking and writing in the late 50s, early 60s, even before independence has become a reality for most of the African continent. They were already warning about neocolonialism. The great Walter Rodney, and I just want, it happens to be here on my desk, so super strong book recommendation. Recent release, Walter Rodney on the Russian Revolution. It's not a book. So first of all, for those that don't know who Walter Rodney is, he's my academic hero. Walter Rodney was the essentially one of the first diaspora Africans to get a PhD and teach African history. He wrote a book called The History of the Upper Guinea Coast, but he wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which when I read that at age 19, changed my life, made me want to study African history, kept me rooted in a radical reading of history, throughout my days. Rodney, and Rodney was killed for his organizing activities in his homeland of Guyana. So he was somebody that was both an academic and an activist, and I've tried to embody that through my life. And I'm saying too much, but I have one of those remote starters. You guys have the remote starter for your car, and I know it wastes a little gas, but I always remote start my car because Walter Rodney was killed in a car bombing. That's how they took him out. Mhm. And literally every time I walk towards my car and do the auto start, I think of Walter Rodney. So Walter Rodney called uh, what was happening in the late 1950s and 1960s. He called it flag independence, which is, this wonderful, wonderfully dismissive and descriptive characterization of escaping from colonialism only to find yourself still in colonialism, right? Um, there is nothing post-colonial about the era that we currently occupy. We occupy, at best, a neo-colonial era. And what Gaza has reminded so many of us of is that we are still deeply embedded in like 1550s Spanish style genocidal settler colonialism. Like that's still a thing. So we are still deeply embedded in these, kind of structures. And Fanon understood this. And this is also connects with what I said yesterday, is that you could see the reproduction of the harms of the African colonial state in the organizational structures of some of the resistance movements as they were emerging. Again, yesterday I pointed you to Mahmoud Mamdani's excellent book, Citizen and Subject. There is another one, Crawford Young, who's not the political scientist that Mamdani is, but he made a very, very good argument in a book called The African Colonial State in Comparative Perspective. And what he said was that most of the repressive mechanisms and the means of exploitation and the fascist state control that you see in post-colonial Africa is because essentially African elites just assumed the reins of an extractive fascist colonial state. The modalities through which they ruled, the modalities through which they ruled were modalities that were directly inherited unchanged from the structures of colonial state. So the colonial state is a carceral state, and post-colonial states are carceral states. They're police states, they're surveillance states, they're states where dissent is punished. They're states that make people disappear to prison islands, just like Ahmadou Bamba was disappeared to a prison island. And that's what happens when you don't redo the fundamental structure. You just swap out the elites that are at the top of the structure. Do you understand why this is such an important set of lessons for us to learn? Because if we don't, we are going to find ourselves, we're going to be our oppressors 2.0. We are going to wire into the structures of our governance all of the completely devastating patterns of political domination that have emerged from capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy over the last 5 centuries. And that struggle, yes, it starts in here. It starts with the deprogramming, it starts with the reprogramming, it starts with the healing, but it has to then move out into all of the structures that we create, especially the cultural structures that we create. I see your hand, Drew, and I'm coming in just 1 second, but I want to finish this point because this is going to connect to something that Amilcar Cabral is going to say in a minute. I don't know if he's my favorite MC, but he's definitely in my top 5 favorite MCs. Is Wise Intelligent from Poor Righteous Teachers. And one of the great highlights of my career, along with like being able to pitch in the French World Series at age 40, and I'll tell you that story later, was coming back to making hip hop records, in my mid 40s and doing an album or doing a track with Wise Intelligent from Poor Righteous Teachers. So he became a friend of mine, and we still text from time to time. And he visits my hip hop history class, and he said something in that class one time. He said, "Narrative scripts human behavior the way that code scripts computers." Narrative scripts human behavior the way that code scripts computers. And I was like, damn, that's a bar. Because it explains to you why the struggle over history and the struggle over culture is so central, not in the artifact and museum memorial kind of way that Fanon is criticizing. It's not that you go back to unearth, how does Fanon put it, little known cultural treasures so that you can shame your colonizer for oppressing you. Like, that's not going to happen. But rather it's so that you can pull on those threads of narrative that can become constitutive of your liberation imagination. And that means you are making selective choices about what you will bring forward from the past and what you will leave behind. And this is something that people forget is always inherent. Man, y'all are getting the good stuff today. Like, this is coming straight out of the deep end of the pool. But this is always inherent in the word tradition. The original word tradition in Latin literally means that which is transmitted. But that which is transmitted is selected for transmission because it is still relevant. So the work of cultural producers, the work of historians, the work of storytellers, the work of movement builders, and that's y'all. Y'all are all that. That's the beauty of Gramsci's definition of intellectuals, is it's not about where your degree is from. It's once you understand that you always occupy an interstitial position between political powers and the people, that you can then use your intellectual capacities for liberation rather than to reproduce the colonizer's norms or to reproduce the capitalist norms or to reproduce the imperialist norms. Each one of you is bearers of culture. Each one of you serves these functions of an intellectual whose tasks are interpretive or communicative in one way or another. You might be a visual artist, you're still an intellectual in those terms. And then that creates a set of questions as how are you going to then operationalize your talents, your gifts, your creativity, your personhood, your soul as weapons of our collective liberation, as tools that will shift the narrative from a narrative that is about internalizing our domination, as we talked about yesterday, and reproducing it like automatons, which is what most of us do, right? To making reasoned choices about how we are going to deploy our gifts as cultural creators and as culture builders. Drew, thank you for your patience. I'm gonna try that again.
Oh yeah, it worked this time. Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to offer a couple of thoughts related to like how, because you know I'm a huge Gramsci fan. He's my favorite writer, and for me, that's Fanon was kind of the gateway into like, oh, there's another way to be a Marxist. Like the really annoying Marxists around me are not the only way to be that, you know?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring up, you mentioned at the beginning, I really resonated with the conversation about like the low casualties on the French side and then struggling with how to deal with the moral complexity of that. Because my grandpa actually was one of the first waves of bombers in Vietnam and got shot down and survived. And then my mom being born in Japan on a base, she understood that war was bad, but could never really understand like the real true historical implications of what my grandpa went through. And so for me, Gramsci seeing that there's like, because that's my Italian side of my family, it was like, oh, there's an Italian who gets this. Like it just like being able to have this understanding of why the world around me in California felt so evil and politically desolate was really liberating. And I think for people to like seek out those kinds of authors that help them connect to their history is really important because it's about trying to really interrogate like how has my family's trauma affected my limitations as an organizer and as a person, and how what do I need to question that they haven't questioned? Because for me, that's been a long struggle with my family and myself of like trying to untangle those things and question like our privileges come from that denial of evil. And that's why that book I mentioned yesterday was so powerful for me, the book After Evil. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to bring into the conversation to encourage people to look into like what kind of Marxist movements were going on in your ancestors' countries and what were they up to?
Okay. So I'll just tell you what's happening inside of me right now in response to this beautiful intervention of yours, Drew, before I address it substantively. All I can think about right now is Fred Hampton and talking about how he's high off of the people. Because that's how I feel right now. I mean, like this conversation is as much of a natural high as I'm gonna get, um, because you've tapped right into the heart of the matter. Is that wherever we are situated in structures of power in our contemporary moment, um, whether we are descended from colonizers or descended from the colonized, and of course most of us are both, right? That within our genetic memory, within our ancestral lineage, within our specific past and our shared past, there are revolutionary forebears who showed us the way, who lit the way for us. And one of the principal costs of whiteness is that whiteness papers over all of those specific legacies of anti-racist struggle, of anti-imperialist struggle, of anti-capitalist struggle. Toni Morrison, in all of her brilliance and grandeur, one of her finest moments for me is when what's the guy's name? Charlie, is it Rose? The PBS guy is interviewing her, and she's talking about white supremacy and racism, about the deleterious effects that they have on white people. And she says, it's a very serious problem that we never talk about for what it is. It's like a kind of madness. Again, echoing things that Fanon said. And then she said, if you can only be tall because other people are on their knees, you have a terrible problem. But the thing is that if you investigate the ancestral lineages of those people that have come to identify as white or be constructed by the state as white, you find Gramsci's and you find John Brown's. And why can our narrative not be rooted in the Eugene Debs of the world? Why does it have to be rooted? And it's because those narratives are being deployed to produce real world consequences today, to socialize people into a kind of normative violence and to conceal from you all of your revolutionary ancestors. All of them. Because those are the threads that we can pull on to tell a different story. I'm going to give you guys one of my favorite readings of all time. And I'll try, if somebody just sends me a reminder, Jason maybe can send me the reminder to do this, to put it in the revolutionary learning community. It's an essay by the late great historian Nathan Irvin Huggins, and he called it The Deforming Mirror of Truth. Okay, which is, I mean, as far as title goes, that goes pretty hard, because like it immediately draws you in, like, what does he mean? Well, he talks about how the narrative of American history is always designed to press down racial slavery and make it disappear so it's part of the conversation, and not part of the conversation. Press down indigenous genocide. It's always designed to create this mythology. He said, but if instead of trying to make this story disappear, it became your core narrative, you could have a much more powerful and inclusive mythology, a mythology of how the people that have been most abused and dispossessed by these United States of America have nonetheless given it its most profound lessons in the meanings of freedom. That they have extended what liberation looks like in every single moment. And he said, this true narrative is exactly the kind of mythology that we need in a society that is renouncing white supremacy, that's renouncing capitalism, that these allow us to connect our stories of resistance, our stories of struggle, not in a way that is like, oh yeah, my ancestors were oppressed too because we're Irish. No, not that one. The one where we pour into a history of shared struggle for liberation. And that is where we are. That is the narrative that we need. That's some who asked about narrative. Like, that's the narrative. Someone asked about narrative yesterday. Is that is the story. It is the story of our contributions, wherever we might be on various ancestral and ideological backgrounds, to this shared struggle for liberation. That's the story that we have to tell. And in order to tell those stories, we have to know those stories. Right? In order to tell those, I tell this to my graduate students all the time. You can get a colonial archive to tell you a story that it doesn't want to tell you, but you cannot get it to tell you a story that it doesn't know. Which means you are going to have to go and do the work in your own family. You're going to have to uncover those oral histories. You're going to have to listen to your grandfather's story and your grandmother's story, and conduct a reckoning in your own heart about how you can draw out, as Drew had, from your own experience, an anchor that allows you to like stand on your own liberation truth, whoever you are, wherever you come from. And the thing is that if each of us feels empowered to tell those stories, then the culture that we create will be liberatory, will be emancipatory. I got through the first round of questions and covered many of the things in my notes in doing so, but not all of them. So let me get to the next part of the conversation with an eye to the time, and we'll have another opportunity for Q&A before we wrap. Let me see. Okay, are you guys able to see that? Do you have Fanon or not? Yes. Okay. So a conversation about Fanon and culture and national consciousness and the nationalist bourgeoisie and all those things. We can come back to that as needed if people want to go back to the readings. But as I was, working my way again through Fanon, I realized that the next interlocutor that we needed in order to get to the next stage of this conversation was Amilcar Cabral. And I also realized that probably almost none of you will have heard of Cabral, which is in and of itself, like a tragedy. Cabral was a leading, Marxist thinker, organizer, resistance leader in both his homeland of Cape Verde and also in Portuguese Guinea. So the Portuguese colonies in West Africa. He was one of the principal figures. He was assassinated in 1973, the year that I was born. The first thing that I want to say about Cabral it is not one of the passages here, but it's one that I want you to remember. Cabral said, "A people's capacity for liberation is indexed by how much their culture differs from that of their colonizers." A people's capacity for liberation is indexed by how much their culture differs from that of their colonizers. This is an incredibly profound statement and a damning indictment. And it reveals for us the limits. We tend to think of the limits of our organizing as primarily political. But if you take seriously what Cabral said, you immediately realize that they're cultural. That our existence and our cultural existence and our material lives and our social lives differ so little from the people that oppress us. And that takes us back into that conversation that we had yesterday, is that do we have selves that are free from those internal oppressions? Because if we don't, we're going to write those oppressions into all of our social relationships. We may want liberation, but we're still hopeless individualists. When it comes down to like making decisions about where we live, what neighborhood we're in, we reproduce all of the, the racist and classist tropes of the people that oppress us and start talking about crime in this area or whatever in that area. And this hit me when I was probably in my early 20s, when I realized that Black people had created some novel art form, musical art form that had, like universal cultural reach, pretty much like clockwork every 30 years since emancipation. And then the 30 years on hip hop timed out and we didn't create anything new. And then it became 40 years, and then it became 50 years. And I realized it was because we are living just like the people that oppressed us now. There's no new truth to come out of the experience. It's just a bunch of Black capitalists and wannabe Black capitalists. That was really hard for me to sit with. So now back to Cabral. course, the never-ending argument with my tabs. So the first thing to say, not the first line, I'll come back to that one. The second one, whatever may be the ideological or idealistic characteristics of cultural expression, culture is an essential element of the history of a people. Culture is perhaps the product of this history, just as the flower is the product of a plant. I mean, he's spitting right there, obviously, because that's just such a simple and powerful metaphor, but it helps connect the conversation that we had yesterday about history with the conversation today that we're having about culture, is that culture is the efflorescence of a people's history. And the cutting off of our connectedness to those histories, to the ones that are, visible in my skin and also visible in the narrative like that Drew brought forth to us, is that we have to actually be involved in cultivating these kinds of flowers. We have to be reconnecting broken histories. We have to be nurturing and cultivating a new kind of cultural efflorescence, because liberation is at its core culture, and that means getting outside of the logic of capitalism, getting outside of the logic of individualism, and understanding this responsibility to be different kinds of, yes, consumers of culture, for sure. Jason and a few others were with me at the end of the end of Empire Conference here at UCSB right before the election, and Saul Williams made this incredibly powerful point. I mean, first of all, he gave an incredible keynote. You can find it on my YouTube channel. But he made this point. He was like, he just realized at a certain point that no matter how much he loved the hip hop music, that there were certain things that he could not listen to anymore because of the misogyny in it, because of the harm that was being reproduced in the culture itself. He just couldn't do it. No matter how much he loved it, he could not listen to that kind of music anymore. And so making some choices about what kinds of things we're going to consume obviously transforms, what we produce. We had a conversation, about veganism and what we put in our bodies yesterday. Well, culture is consumption as well. And anybody that's like done database management knows garbage in, garbage out. When we are consuming toxins, then we will reproduce toxicity. And this is hard, guys. Like, I don't know what you guys were expecting out of this class, but like the psychology of liberation means examining the things that we watch and the things that we listen to and the things that we allow into our hearts. Because whatever we talked about Imam Fore Drame yesterday, he pointed out that the Quran has two primary sensory pathways that it describes. Something passes from the seeing to the hearing to the heart, or from the hearing to the seeing to the heart. He said that the exception to this is inspiration. Inspiration hits the heart first and then comes out through the seeing and the hearing. It comes out through the senses. And in order for the heart to be a place that is open and receptive to inspiration, then the heart needs to be nourished with sound nourishment. We need to be making decisions about whether the ideas and the foods and the music and the culture and the agriculture that we are consuming is building the healthiest version of us. Because ultimately we will express whatever we consume. And that is a challenge for every last one of us. That's the reason why I got back into making music in my mid-40s. Because I understood that like I could serve a role of mentoring a younger group of musicians who had all of the talent and all of the ability, but weren't necessarily asking the questions about culture and cultural production, because in the end, all art is propaganda. All art is propaganda. It's just that some of it is self-consciously propaganda, and most of it is unconscious propaganda. Back to Cabral. Quotes 1 and 3. So the first piece, and this is, there's a great book about Cabral. It would be the one thing that I would recommend you guys start with. It's called Tell No Lies, Claim No Easy Victories. And it's a kind of shortened version of this first quote. But these words are the exact words. Hide nothing from the masses of our people. Tell no lies. Expose lies whenever they are told. Mask no difficulties, mistakes, or failures. Claim no easy victories. A revolutionary culture and genuine liberation, whether morally, spiritually, ethically, or politically, will always be rooted in truth with a capital T. Do I need to say that again? Any true revolution, any true liberation, ethically, morally, spiritually, or politically, will always be rooted in truth. It can never be rooted in lies or fictions or falsehoods. That is why we will win. And if I were to pick a single verse of the Quran for this moment, it is that truth is cast against falsehood and falsehood shatters. If I were to pick a saying of the Prophet Muhammad to back that one up, peace be upon him, it would be that the reign of falsehood is but a day and the reign of truth is eternal. Root your intervention in truth. And that begins with rooting your intervention in your truth and in your story and in your ancestry and in your lineage and in your experience. But it also means connecting your story to our story. There's a set of rhetorical questions by the I don't know, maybe first or second century CE Jewish theologian Rabbi Hillel, where he asks 3 questions. He says, if I'm not for myself, then who will be for me? If I won't tell my own story, then who will tell it? Right? But then he asked the second question. He said, but if I'm only for myself, then what have I become? Right? So it begins with that self-advocacy and that self-truth telling. Because if you don't tell the story, then who's going to tell it? If you don't speak your truth, then who's going to speak it for you? Right? But then it extends from there to saying that, but if this is just about me, then what am I? I'm a monster. This has to be about us. So what is the story of us? What is the story of our collective liberation? How do we string together these stories of overcoming adversity, contributing, so that it becomes a collective narrative? And then the last question that Rabbi Hillel asked in that triad was, if not now, when? What are we waiting for? Do you think that 2 years of merciless assault on the third holiest place on the planet for Muslims, and the center of all three Abrahamic faiths in one way or another, that's just going to continue endlessly. I mean, you might not be a person of faith, but I am, and I'm gonna tell you, God is gonna call it a wrap if we could let it keep going like this. The urgency of immediate action, the urgency of taking the necessary steps now, that is capital T truth. We'll say more about that in a minute. Back to Cabral. And this is Cabral then also said, always remember that the people are not fighting for ideas, nor what is in men's minds. The people fight and accept the sacrifices demanded by the struggle in order to gain material advantages, to live better and in peace, to benefit from progress and for the better future of their children. National liberation, the struggle against colonialism, the construction of peace, progress, and independence are hollow words devoid of any significance unless they can be translated into a real improvement of living conditions. Many of us, I don't want to put words in Drew's mouth, but this is going to be my paraphrase. Many of us are, socialists of one kind or another that are recovering from our interactions with Marxists. Ongoing interactions with Marxists. The only reason why I mention it is that anti-capitalist, socialist, Marxist, revolutionary, communist, Green Party is eco-socialist in its definition. Socialists do not carry out successful revolutionary change because they get everyone in the society to become socialists. That has never happened. It has never happened, and it never will. There has never been an instance where you educated the people into socialism and then they rose up against capitalism because they believed in socialism. If you think that that's going to happen, you're out of your damn mind. Every single successful anti-capitalist revolution, and I say that because there are some of them that come before Marx that are rising up against imperialism, the slave trade. I write about them. You know, the Haitian Revolution is an anti-capitalist revolution. Doesn't have anything to do with Marxism, right? But all of that is to say is every one of these successful movements, what happens is that the anti-capitalists or the socialists, as the case may be, offer the material solution to the struggles and the conditions of the people. That's it. In the end, if you do not offer them something better, all of the rhetoric, all of the ideology, meaningless. In Wolof, they say the child of Adam doesn't release what their hand is holding until they're reaching for something better. People will literally be squeezing a hot coal that burns them, which is what capitalism is. But until you give them something to reach for, instead of just keep telling them to put that down, they're going to hold on to it because it's all they have. So yes, I've drilled down heavily on culture through this conversation that we've started today, because the culture and the spirituality are connected. It's how we heal. It's how we bring about something new. We need to create distinctions. between what we're offering and what the systems that we are embedded in are offering. But in the end, if you cannot meet people's basic needs, then they don't want nothing that you have to offer. And I'm going to be blunt about this. This is the part that comes with an ask. It comes with an ask of everybody in this room. And that for before we get to the final round of Q&A, I'm going to turn things over to Jason Call, my campaign manager, because the ask is that you guys, if you are really in this space to try to help build this revolutionary movement, taking classes is not going to do it. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to keep doing the classes. Roots of Revolution, great concept, and we need to do it. Like, I'm thinking, I don't know if y'all are ready for Cabral. Well, let me take that back. I know y'all are ready for Cabral. I don't know if the world is ready for Cabral. In other words, I don't know if I put the call out into the world for people to come study it, whether they're going to understand how badly they need it. But one way or another, we're getting, Cabral into the next set of conversations. I'm going to keep doing the teaching, but the reality is that in order to meet people's basic needs and in order to fight against the power, the way that Fanon told us to yesterday, we need to build power, and that is going to take resources. And I know many of y'all donated when you clicked the link to get in here, and I know many of y'all didn't. So Jason, I'm gonna turn things over to you for the next 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll start to wrap this thing up. Let me unmute you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want everybody to meet my campaign manager, Jason Call, who's rocking his Dope Beware t-shirt. Jason was also our campaign manager on the Steinware campaign. Proud to call him a fellow soldier as well as a friend.
Thank you so much, Butch. And I just, I first want to say that every time I listen to Butch in teacher mode, outside of teacher mode also, but inside teacher mode, I've got a political science degree from the University of Washington back in 1994, and we didn't learn any of this. And I've been a socialist for 35 years, and I learn every time I get in the room with Butch in a situation like this. I suck it up like a sponge. I absolutely love it, and I learn something new, many, many new things every single time. And so I want to, Butch says, I don't know if the world is ready for Cabral. I don't know if California is ready for Butch Ware. But that's what we are here for. And so if you are inspired, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on with the campaign. Butch just gave last weekend in Sacramento absolutely rousing, I would call it a performance, not really a performance, but responses to SEIU, Service Employees International Union, held a candidate forum. And Butch, I've characterized in my social media posts as absolutely laying waste to the capitalist opposition on Team Blue and Team Red. And the response from the SEIU membership was rousing. They were on their feet. Butch won the candidate, sort of the membership choice. Um, they took a vote on who was the favorite candidate. Butch won outright. So we are trying to parlay that into getting Politico, the magazine, the journal, online. They're holding a live forum next Wednesday, the 27th. Butch has not been invited to that, and we are trying to get them. We're really pressuring them hard to get him into that, because when people hear Butch, they are, it's like they're converted. People, as everybody in this room knows, Butch knows how to speak to people in a way that they can understand and learn and know that there's a better path forward, especially in this capitalist system that we live in. But as Butch said, none of this happens without resources. So I'm here to make the pitch for you guys to donate to the campaign. Butchware for Gov. I'll go ahead and put it. You guys all know where it is. Butchwareforgov.com. But we have volunteers, and many of you are in the Mighty Networks volunteer on in the network there. Volunteers, we have them all up and down the state, and they are waiting for us to put resources in their hands so that they can go out to their communities and start spreading the message. I'm having conversations with volunteers, while the seminar is ongoing. But this is what's needed. if you can, anybody who, the max donation you can give in California, like through the life of the primary only, and the primary is in June 2nd. So we got about 9 months to go here. The max donation you can give is $36,400. Now that's a big chunk because at the federal level you can only give $3,300. So they have upped the stakes in California, and we expect this to be a $10 million race. So we have to get people who are, what can I do right now? If you have the means, whatever it is in your heart to give, whatever it is that Butch is speaking to you, that speaks to your heart and says, I know this is the movement that I need to be a part of, that Butch posed the question, what are you waiting for? So butchwereforgov.com. If you can, if you can max out, not necessarily saying anybody can max out, but if you can, the limit is $36,000, $36,400. But we will take, obviously, gratefully, any financial contribution, whether it's $100, $1,000, even, if you can set it up as a recurring contribution, $25 a month, $50 a month, whatever you can give. It all goes to one, paying staff, because you cannot run a campaign in a state like California unless you have staff on the ground, and we have people ready to do that work. We just need to build up the funding to make sure that they can get paid, to make sure that we can have regional campaign offices. That's my pitch for you right now. If you can kick in whatever you can do, if it's a one-time donation, we're grateful. If you can set up a recurring donations are actually particularly important because it allows us to budget for the rest of the campaign. Like, we know we've got this money coming in. We know we've got a certain amount of money that is recurring donations coming in. We can budget for every month as we move forward. We know we'll be able to spend on these particular things. We also, I want people to know that we are setting up merchandise. People are saying, where can I get signs? Where can I get t-shirts? We're in conversations with a progressive merchandiser right now. They only work with progressive campaigns. And we'll be setting up that web store here. I'm sorry, you see me jerking around. I'm playing ball with my dog right here. She won't leave me alone when I'm in the kitchen here. That's the ask. Everybody has gotten something good out of this seminar. If you didn't kick in to join the seminar, please at least do that much. And if you can support the campaign at a one-time or at a sustaining level, we would gratefully appreciate it. We've got great things going on. Butch is going to be flying up to Sacramento tomorrow because on the 8th, the Asian Pacific American Public Affairs Group is holding a candidate forum that Butch is invited to. That's going to be on the 8th in Sacramento. And as part of that exercise, APAPA, APAPA, which is the acronym for, or the initialism for that group, they have secured a CBS Sacramento interview with all of the candidates. There are going to be 9 candidates there, and so people in Sacramento at least are going to get a taste of what Butch can bring to the table in that CBS interview. Again, just even the flight up to Sacramento and back, that's, it's going to be $400 hotel stay and whatnot. This is all campaign expense. And so just so you know, whatever money comes in, we spend wisely. We make sure that it is going to build and grow the campaign. That's it. That's my pitch right there. Hopefully we can get some good donations out of this today, and appreciate you guys all for being here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jason. I saw Angela's hand. Go ahead, Angela. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I was gonna donate the little I can. I'm out of work, so for employer and occupation, I wrote NA. Is that
Yep.
all right?
That's absolutely fine. The Federal Election Commission just needs you to fill out those 4 fields with whatever's factual. And I'll just say, to underscore what Jason said, there's a few things that y'all should understand. I don't take any salary for running for office. I lose money by running for office. From the time that my first academic book came out in 2014, I've been invited to give academic lectures between 50 and 60 times every year. and my standard honorarium for those talks is $2,500. And when I'm running for office, I can't do any of those talks. And I'm not taking a penny from the campaign except whatever is necessary to fly and coming back. My wife is the key admin for the campaign. She doesn't take a penny for the campaign, but I do need to be able to pay all of the people that are scaling up field operations all throughout this state because freedom ain't free. And leftists have this aversion to money. But the thing is that resources are needed in order to fight. Like Art reminded us, fighting against violence, you don't fight back against violence with violence, you fight back with resistance, you fight back with power, but power requires resources. And this is one of the things that, frankly, like the Muslim community has been, great with. When I joined Jill's campaign, the campaign had raised $1 million in the 10 months before I joined the campaign, and we were able to raise 2.5 million in the 10 weeks that I was on the campaign. Because Muslims understand that resources are needed. Yeah, go ahead, Jason. Hold on, let me get you.
Our volunteer coordinator, Wendy, is here in the room with us and noted something in the chat that I had missed. Somebody had asked, because you're only allowed to donate to U.S. political campaigns if you are a U.S. citizen. Somebody in the chat had asked, if I'm not in the U.S., can I donate to somebody? Can I transfer money to somebody else and they can donate to the campaign? Let me say this. What you do with your money is none of our business. Okay?
We didn't see nothing and we didn't hear nothing.
If we were to say to you, I'm not that yes you can do that, but if we were to encourage people to kind of skirt these election laws, we would be in violation. But the bottom line is, what you do with your money is absolutely none of our business, and I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay. Who your friends are and what they do with your money after you send it to them is entirely y'all's business. And nobody has anything else to do with it. I'll say one kind of last piece on this. As I mentioned, a lot of times leftists have aversion towards don't make a virtue out of poverty. Okay. The aim is to eliminate poverty. In the Islamic tradition, one of the sayings of the Prophet's cousin Ali was, he said, if poverty were a man, I would have slain him. The goal of all of this organizing is to end poverty and to meet people's basic needs. But you have to understand that we are up against people who are accepting massive corporate donations. Katie Porter has already raised $3 million. And Katie Porter found out last Saturday what it's like to have to be on stage with me. It did not go well for Katie Porter. Like, I'm just going to tell you that. It was really... Go ahead, Jason.
And the audio of that is available.
Yeah, you can watch the audio. We posted it to my YouTube channel. We have leaked audio from the event.
It's bootleg. It's a little bit grainy. And I will say this, the hardest parts to hear are when the audience is clapping so hard for Butch, you can't hear him finish his sentence. That's how much Butch destroyed the competition. It
wasn't a competition at all. I mean, there were 7 corporate Democrats on the stage. The billionaire got up and walked out after I got done talking the first time, which like the billionaire fragility was wild. But all of that is just to say, it's just the more people that can be exposed to this message, the more successful we're going to be. And the good news is we only have to fundraise right one time. If we can get to that at least second position on June 2nd of 2026, then you have my word, I'll break the duopoly forever. I will break the duopoly forever, because it's going to be me versus Katie, and nobody's going to be able to say, oh, you're going to let the state go to Republicans, because it's just going to be blue versus green. Their core go-to argument is not going to be on the table. And in terms of candidate quality, communication, and the platform that we're running on, they can't compete. So we're going to end them, but this goes back to where we started, and I'll use this to transition into kind of our last piece. Malcolm said, "We're not outnumbered, we're outorganized. Never let the man that you are against tell you how many of you there are. Do not underestimate our capacity to get this job done, but it is going to require that everybody literally contribute everything that they can to the cause. And that's not just financially, that's also volunteers. We've got a volunteer coordinator who's in the chat now, who has literally done intake Zoom interviews with almost 500 volunteers that have come onto the campaign. She'll talk to you about how much time you have, where you're located, what your skill set will connect you with people on the ground. But in the end, all of those field operations teams, and we've now got them in multiple counties throughout the state, those are going to have to be people that we pay, and those are going to have to be actual field offices as we get close to the primary time. So this is going to take resources. And if you're not in a position to donate today, if you're not in a position to do a monthly donation, then as soon as you can, do so. But in the meantime, volunteer. In the meantime, contribute of your time, because every last soldier is going to be needed. Let me say one last piece, and then I'll open things to questions. I'll go back to Fanon and Cabral for our close. Hide nothing from the masses, tell no lies, expose lies wherever they are told, mask no difficulties, mistakes, failures, claim no easy victories. It's not going to be easy. It's not, but it is possible. From a structural standpoint, we're going to need about 15 to 20% of the vote on June 2nd of 2026 in order to finish in the top two. If we finish in the top two, that's the whole election, because it means that they will not be able to keep me off of debate stages. And even now, having a 1-hour sit-down interview with CBS Sacramento is going to be a game changer. Having a second gubernatorial debate forum where all of the candidates are on stage, because these people, listen, the people of California are not stupid. They're going to see the difference between quality and lack of quality. They're going to see the difference between a corporate control candidate and an actual leader. So if you're in a position to contribute, contribute. And that brings us back to our conversation, back to Fanon. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. I've sat with this one for a long time. I've sat with this one for a long time. Because the first time that I taught those words was I was 19. It was 32 years ago. I had started a group. We called ourselves Africa's Progeny for Global Power. It was my first Pan-Africanist reading group, and we read Walter Rodney, and we read Amilcar Cabral, and we read Frantz Fanon. And when I came across this line, um, I believed then, as I believe now, that our mission, the mission of this generation, is to put the final nails in the coffin of 5 centuries of white supremacist capitalist empire. I believe that what we are witnessing in Palestine is the extinction burst of the Zionist entity. I think that if we do not desist in our resistance, they are going to go bankrupt and the end of Zionism is near. And I think that the end of Zionism is one of the harbingers of the final end of American empire. When Dr. Jill Stein asked me to run, I should tell that story another time, but I did that Instagram live with them and then with Jill, and then the next day my wife and I are coming in from a movie. It's like 9 o'clock, and so that means it's like midnight on the East Coast. And they ask if I can call me to ask if I can get on a Zoom, and I see Jason and like a dozen other people and Jill on the call, and I'm like, uh-oh. And that's when they asked me 24 hours after we did an IG live if I would consider running. But one of the reasons why I accepted it was when I asked Jill, what's your vision for American foreign policy? She said it's to dismantle the American empire. And like talking about like, that good feeling in your chest. I said, yeah, you better hurry up and do it quick too before somebody else do it for you. Because those two things look very different. If we can transform in this revolutionary moment, the mechanisms of governance of the most ruthless, dangerous, exploitative, and violent state ever to exist in human history, if we can have that peaceful revolution from within, then the American Republic might just survive the collapse of its empire, but the collapse of its empire is happening one way or the other. And Malcolm said it in 1964, and I'm going to say it in 2025 and into 2026. Malcolm said it's either going to be the ballot or the bullet. So for those of us like Art, for those of us like me, because you guys will associate me, with Malcolm. You hear me quote Malcolm a lot, but Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba is my teacher. Like that's my spiritual mentor. I will prefer nonviolence every day of the week, and I will prefer the path of universal mercy and compassion. I'll only fight when I'm backed into a corner, but I will always fight when backed into a corner. We are presenting the last best option for America to be free of this oppression by the ballot. Because what is happening now with the escalation of the police state and ICE becoming the fifth largest military organization in the world from a funding standpoint is that we are speeding headlong towards mass violence in the streets and the collapse of both the empire and the republic, and a lot of needless bloodshed and a lot of needless suffering. And we have one last shot to bring the visions of these revolutionary teachers to fruition, to bring the prayers of our oppressed and our abolitionist ancestors to fruition. But it's going to take all of us. It's going to take this room being twice its size the next time, 3 times its size the next time. It's going to take, sorry, it's going to take a jihad. It's going to take a struggle. It is going to take a fight for our very lives. So I have said what I wanted to say from the communication of content, and I want to spend the last 30 minutes just answering y'all's questions about any pieces of the teachings, any of the Fanon or the Cabral or the revolutionary theory behind it, or about organizing questions, or about campaign strategy questions. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this as a campaign call rather than just as an educational call is so that we can use it as an organizational build. So that part starts now. Go ahead and raise your hands and ask what you need to ask or say what you need to say. Angela, I saw a hand up earlier. Oh, I'm not sure if Afnan's question about liberalism was answered yet. Thank you, Marianne, for giving me the opportunity to come back to it. The simplest way of answering the question, what's wrong with liberals, really comes from actually the best place that I learned it was from Rodney. So again, back to Walter Rodney, was that in the end, both liberal and conservative political movements are bourgeois political movements. They are rooted in a particular class position and serve only certain class interests, so that they are essentially differing ideological poles in the same position of class oppression. And that's the reason why liberals never structurally attack capitalism. They never structurally attack imperialism. They always enable both. During the period of slavery in the United States, the liberals were the ones saying slavery is really, really bad, but if we don't have slavery, the economy is going to collapse. So maybe we should just phase it out over an extended, period of time. And that was the position of the Whig Party. And that's why there is no more Whig Party, because that answer doesn't work. The position of the Liberal Party in the United Kingdom at the height of British imperialism in Africa was, well, yeah, it's bad that we bombed all those people into submission and beheaded their chiefs and their kings, but really, like democratic institutions are really important, and now they can have access to them. So we just have to give them a little more of the good things that we have and a little more access to the benefits of white Western civilization. So liberalism is the smiling face of white supremacy, capitalism, and imperialism, but it differs in terms of its class interest in no way from conservatism. They're a single tier. So if you ever listen to me talk, I'm not always successful in this, but I try to be precise in my language, is that when I want to put the liberals and the conservatives together, I will say that's a bourgeois philosophy, right? Um, the ideology, now to really, if you want to get into Marxist terminology, the ideology is epiphenomenal. It's not significant. And that's the reason why people move from liberal to conservative all the time, within the span of their lifetimes, because it in no way requires them to fundamentally reassess the exploitative basis of the entire social order in which they're embedded. Whereas, and that was the position of all of these revolutionaries. It was the position of Rodney. It was the position of Fanon. It was the position of Assata Shakur. It was the position of all of the, Angela Davis before she endorsed Kamala, which that hurt me so badly, because like that's a hero of mine throughout my whole life. But all of that's just to say, that's why liberalism isn't going to work. And I'll just use this as a teachable moment on one last piece, because I've had to say this in quite a few environments lately. Neoliberalism is not related to that liberal versus conservative divide in any way. And the language of it makes that opaque for people. It makes that hard for people to understand. It's neoliberalism is not like a new kind of liberal, like the 2020 version compared to the 1980 version. Neoliberalism is an economic term, and neoliberalism is essentially what Reagan called trickle-down economics. It's when you have a private sector that is responsible for assuming a bunch of public functions. So it's where you turn over a bunch of core state functions to private industry so that they can take a profit off of the top of your basic needs. And from that standpoint, there is no difference between Democrats and Republicans or liberals and conservatives. Both of the bourgeois political parties are neoliberals. So people don't think that neoliberals is just for the Democrats. Neoliberalism is also the basic economic philosophy of the Republicans as well. Ariana.
Thank you. This relates a bit to what you said yesterday morning about using the master's tools to take down the master's house, but not using the master's tools to create the new world.
Yes.
So I'm curious about the place of electoral politics in all of this. I'm thinking also about what you said about, consciousness is not just going to be raised, like the structures need to be changed, and then change in consciousness will follow from that. So if colonialism, the violence of colonialism and the violence of fascism, which, as you eloquently pointed out, is colonialism turned back against white people, that violence will only come to an end through greater violence. So where do electoral politics fit into
Right. So that's where I disagree with Fanon. And partially I disagree because of Rodney's analysis of the Russian Revolution. It wasn't greater violence that caused the collapse of Tsarism and the success of the Russian Revolution. It wasn't. It was the failure of Tsarism and the Bolsheviks providing the best organizational model coming out of the collapse of Tsarism. So what I would say to modify Fanon's conclusions is that colonialism only responds to superior power, and that we organize for power, and that power is multifaceted. Power is, and this is mostly Fred Hampton echoing in my head. The real power is in the people. A Bangladeshi, a Bengali dictator had to step down from power because the students got out in the streets, demonstrated their power, and would not retreat. They exercised their power. All of the violence was against them, and it wasn't in the great scheme of things that much. I mean, hundreds of people lost their lives, but nothing like, the kind of extermination campaigns that we've seen in Gaza, but it produced the outcome. So we need to be thinking about how to organize for the maximum flex, right? That how do we assert our power in the circumstance? Now, with respect, how does electoral politics play in that? This is the biggest difference. And I circulated a reel because I actually answered this question for a crowd of about 50 people that came around me after the SEIU debate. By the way, the next biggest crowd was Katie Porter, had 6 people standing around her. And all of the other Democrat candidates were gone within 15 minutes. I was there taking selfies for 2 hours because there was a line of people around the corner. But I made this point there is that our campaign is about mutual aid, direct action, and electoral politics. That is a successful revolutionary movement. And the theory behind it is the one that I mentioned yesterday from Kwame Ture, is that voting every 4 years is the height of bourgeois irresponsibility, but the vote is how you organize your people. Malcolm in 64 said, we're going to knock on every door in Harlem and we're going to register every black face behind every black door, not as a Democrat or as a Republican, but as an independent. Because, and then he said, it's going to be the ballot or the bullet. So there was a double entendre. The ballot or the bullet was a threat to American authorities, or a promise of what was to come if they continued their oppression. But it was also a threat to people who refused to organize for electoral success. He was saying, we are going to run you out of town if you're not responsible enough to register to vote, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but as an independent, because it was one of the tools that you could use to leverage power. That's why Huey P. Newton ran for Congress not once but twice. That's why the Panthers, despite the misogyny that came to reign in the organization, were incredibly successful in Oakland electoral politics because they understood you could have an immediate impact. And the last part that I'll say is that many of us, listen, Jason knows this. I never thought about running for office. Not one time did it cross my mind. Not one time until they asked me. But when they asked me, I had to think about the question that you asked. And I realized that that's what Malcolm had done. I realized that that's what Kwame Ture had done. I realized that that was what Huey had done. And then I understood why. Because I've been focused on community organizing and activism and largely mutual aid, or what would be conceived as mutual aid. But the thing is that if your elected officials would just desist from harm, then how much more benefit would there be in our mutual aid activities? If your elected officials, forget providing benefit, if they just desisted from harm, then our mutual aid would be less oriented towards just meeting people's basic needs and be more oriented towards flourishing, thriving human development. But as long as our elected officials keep shoveling shit down at us, then the mutual aid and direct action is going to be mostly shoveling off of us. And that's the reason why we have to use these pieces, every single tool. Hamza.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
First, I just wanted to appreciate you. Been following you for a couple of years with your spiritual intensives, and most importantly, through you and through the grace of God, I got connected to Imam Fode and have been learning and training with him for the last year, which I don't have to tell you how transformative that is.
But us saying a word about it for the people in this room is helpful. I mean, I'll just say this: Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, lived in the 19th century. Had this incredible spiritual impact. Wrote 200 different books, and I've been a big, like advocate for the West African Sufi tradition for a long time. When I met Imam Fode, Drame was the first time that I understood that there were people like Ahmadou Bamba still walking around above ground rather than just buried inside of it. And so he is just an absolute gem, like one of those truly enlightened people. And yeah, more people should definitely know that name. Go ahead, Hamza. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, and just a little plug for a further plug for Imam. We opened up a new location, new Zawiya location in Oakland. So for anyone in the Bay Area, please come through and learn more. And when he's here, you just have to experience him, like what you're saying. You just have to experience him. But so my question was, I've been going through this kind of deep colonization process myself. Working in tech for many years, I've made the decision to move into psychology, Islamic psychology in particular, working with Muslim men, both around Islamic psychology, but also political consciousness. But I feel like at the same time, my skills and knowledge of technology, artificial intelligence, all that stuff is still very valuable. And I want to break away from it just because I understand, there's harm in it, but we also can't ignore it. And we need to get ahead of it as well and be educated on it and shape it. So my question is that, you talked about this a little bit earlier about like operationalizing our knowledge and like applying it to our field. How do we do that? Like, what is
Yeah.
the jump from like the education to like actually applying it to our respective fields if we're outside of academia, outside of nonprofits, outside of, like the political space?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to answer is that there is actually a philosophical question that is implicit in your question about AI and how do we engage. And I want to just make what's implicit explicit and raise it to the surface. There is nothing inherently evil about AI. AI is a tool. What is inherently evil is capitalism. And the way that capitalism constructs and utilizes AI is evil and leads to all kinds of necessarily wicked outcomes. And this is easy to understand when if you root yourself in a simple distinction, which is easy for Muslims. It's the distinction between profit and benefit, right? So a capitalist society is organized to maximize profit, whereas an ethical society is organized to maximize benefit. If artificial intelligence was organized to maximize benefit rather than to maximize profit, then we would all be working about 2.5 hours a day right now and have all of our basic needs met. And that the resources would not be draining, the water would not be getting drained out of Black neighborhoods and wastewater poured into Black neighborhoods. The capitalism is the thing that's easy. AI is a tool. It's just that the tool that it's embedded in turns it into a weapon. But if you were using drone technology to water fields instead of to shoot missiles at children, then you could turn deserts into gardens, which is literally what the Chinese government uses drones for. So all of that is just to say, don't resist a thing in its inherent nature just because of the capitalist utilization of it. And then that leads to the direct question is that if you understand this, then your skill set and your capacities with an ethical orientation can be part of how you fight back against the ill utilization of a tool for a positive utilization of a tool. Rather than withdrawing from a domain of struggle, you engage in that domain of struggle and shift it, right? And in the end, when, where, and how you engage either from the inside of systems or from the outside of systems is contingent. And this, we talked about this in spiritual intensive so many times. I wish I could do a better job of this in this space. I alluded to this yesterday, but it requires a kind of self-awareness of your own ego investment and the state of your desire for worldly attachments and so forth. You need to be able to conduct a very careful and honest internal reckoning. You need to have mentors and teachers in your life who will tell you when you're not seeing your blind spot. Because in the end, people want a cookie cutter answer for should I engage or disengage, but that is not going to work, because whether you engage or disengage depends on the circumstances that you are in, and those circumstances might change tomorrow. If you want an extra reading, read the conclusion of our second book, Jihad of the Pen, where I talked about the fact that in the Islamic tradition, some of the prophets take up the sword and some don't. Some of the saints take up the sword and some don't. And the reason is that it is not central to the mission whether you take political action or military action. What's central to the mission is the accomplishment of the goal. And so therefore, it is a contingent strategic decision whether you take up arms or whether you retreat, because whatever is in the interest of liberation, whatever is in the interest of victory is what you do. So every one of us has to have enough capacity for self-scrutiny that we become responsible decision makers for when we need to walk away from a thing and when we need to dig our heels into fight. And frankly, that is just a level of spiritual and intellectual and ethical discernment that our leftist spaces do not cultivate. They want doctrinaire responses, like, oh, no, you're selling out if you do this. No, not necessarily. It actually depends on why you're doing it, and it depends on what you're doing. And it depends on whether this is a contingent decision in the interest of liberation or it's a contingent decision in the interest of your own, personal financial well-being. The last part, I just want to go back to one thing, and I know I'm being long-winded with this, but this is, I think is important. And this is another one of my arguments with Fanon. And you guys should know how much I love Fanon, so please don't take this the wrong way. But I don't think that decolonization is possible. And I think that that's a hard thing for people to hear. But time does not flow backwards. There is no putting the toothpaste back into the tube once it has been expelled. We are not going to go back to whatever we were before this happened. What we will do is that we will go back to our traditions. We will go back to our cultures and our sacred sources. And just as Fanon pointed out, we'll go back to them not as artifacts, but as living, breathing organisms. And understanding that we have to have the audacity to build something new that is inspired by the old and that is rooted in the old. And that's what it means to discover your mission and to either fulfill it or betray it. But I do think that there is too much liberal neo-traditionalism. So it's neo-traditionalism is when you basically want to create like a new version of something traditional, but what's at the heart of it is a tradition versus modernity dichotomy that you're grappling with. So you want to basically go back to like a museum version of a better time. It's literally, hold on, I didn't think of it this way. It's MAGA except for woke people. Do y'all follow me? Make America Great Again. It's recalling this past that you have to make up. You have to actually invent it. It's not real. And so it's MAGA for woke people. And so there is no decolonization. There is only like the construction of a liberated society. Revolution means liberation, the aim. Tali, nice to see you.
Nice
Doctor, nice to see you. Thank you again for this class. Again, my head is spinning with ideas and inspiration. And yeah, just thank you so much. My question is twofold in terms of someone like me. You have 90 people on this call, just like as an informative question of like, what can an individual person do? Right? Like, how do we create influence in our maybe small niche of where we are, which may not be a lot, but like, what is something I can do to help move the needle for your campaign in a practical way? And then the second question is like, where do we find information about how you're going to do this for governor? Because I know that a lot of people that I'm going to talk to will be like, and also what I feel like in the world right now is like, I'm sorry, just like how much talk are we going to do about Gaza until someone has the balls to actually just stop this, right? Like so much talking, so much discourse, like, okay, and like this is real time. So I feel in terms of like your campaign, this is real time, right? We're seeing so many people talk, and no action. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, where can I find information to help people understand what you're actually going to do and have them be inspired that this is actually potentially something really real to have someone who cares about people and understands systems at the same time? Like, this is a moment, you know? And so that's my twofold. And yeah, and just asking from a very heartbroken place where I'm just like trying to hold on and also help at the same time, you know?
Thank you for both questions. And I'll be honest, like that's the reason for the fundraising call is that we just need more capacity to be able to scale up. I need to be able to hire the person to write that piece for the web site and get it posted, but our digital director is, being paid part-time. So like literally that's part of the reason for the call, because we've got the divestment from genocide, and the way that we can divest from genocide and invest in California. That's what the campaign is about. That's as much as it will engage foreign policy. And also to say that by having California opt out of Zionism, that it sets a powerful example for the entire rest of the nation. So we just literally do need to grow capacity, and so that I can have that narrative right where you can find it, and you can send people to the website. But like I have to hire editor to go through the 15 different speeches where I've said exactly that in front of a crowd of 300 or 400 people, and chop each of those into 4-second segments and string them together into a single narrative, and then put the captions on it and put it in the wide format for YouTube and the skinny format for your phone. And do you picture how many hours of somebody's time that would have to take? And then we have to do that for every single one of our pieces of messaging.
Right.
So quite literally, the most important and effective thing that everyone in the room can do now is to become instruments of fundraising. That's the most important and effective thing. If you don't have anything to give, you know people that do. And rule number one of fundraising in any environment is that you first fundraise with the people that are closest to you, because even if they don't know 100% whether they believe in the cause, they believe in you. But most of us are not willing to leverage our personal relationships to ask people for money for significant causes. And that means that we actually do not believe enough in the thing itself in order to ask someone to invest in it. And if that's the case, then why are you doing it? So the first thing is that, like, and leftists, I need to drill y'all on this. Stop acting so weird about money. Broke people fund incredibly large movements all the time. Marcus Garvey's Black Star Steam Line was funded by dead broke sharecroppers. And when we ask for a monthly donation of $33, y'all spend that at one trip to whatever you replaced Starbucks with. But you act weird about clicking a donate button. You know me. You know that I could give a damn about a penny, that I only care about liberation, that if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, it would not change anything for me, because there's nothing in this material world that I want except for freedom, and y'all still go cheap. The second thing is, if you have not yet had your meeting with our volunteer coordinator, if you have not yet started to create your community block organization, if you have not started your, Wear Warrior, green, green campus, whatever your organization is, like, build it on your block. We've got the team in San Diego has done incredible work to the point where they're building units now in San Diego, even though none of them have been paid. They all done it on a volunteer basis, working around the clock anyway. Now they're ready to extend that out to other parts of the state. Likewise for portions of our team in Oakland. There's not a single person in this room that could not be having a house party. And I can literally zoom into your house party for your fundraiser if I can't be there in person. But we are not serious. And it's my biggest beef with the Green Party. My biggest beef with the Green Party is that if you believe that you are the last line of defense between humanity and extinction, then you need to play to win and stop being weird about the resources that are needed to actually be competitive. You have to have money. And Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, whose words you were listening to on the way in, he said in Masalik al-Janan, The Pathways of Paradise, he said, self-sufficiency is the best state of affair for human beings, but know that the one who has gratitude and abundance surpasses the one who has patience and poverty. And he said the reason is that the one that has gratitude with their abundance spends in the way of good. Poverty is not a virtue, and that is it is an inherent deficiency in classical iterations of Marxism. Poverty is simply not virtuous. If you believe that being broke makes you a better person, you're a capitalist, because you believe that the number and nature of your possessions has some bearing of any kind on your innate value and worth as a human being. And that's one of the fundamental structural issues, is that too much doctrinaire Marxist thinking without an ethical framework embedded in it just flips capitalism's values and inverts them. And the thing is that both linguistically and analytically, an antithesis must contain the thesis. You are still letting material possessions determine your estimation of moral worth. You've just flipped the scale. Whereas those of us that believe in humanity believe that the number and nature of our possessions has nothing to do with our worth, and that we should be putting our resources into taking care of people's basic needs, precisely because the value of a human being should not be contingent upon their material possessions. So put y'all's money where your mouth is and make your house party, have your block party, volunteer for the campaign. I don't know what else I can say in response to that. That got a little heated, but everybody needs to receive that.
Doctor, how much money would you need for an editor? That if there was like a campaign goal that we could collectively just do together today, like how much would you need to have an editor so that I could get these points on your website so that I can start talking about you realistically?
We've got an incredibly gifted Palestinian American writer who like is also a new dad, and he's been published in The Guardian a few times. He's, a great writer. It's just that I can't get him to do this work on a volunteer basis in a timely fashion because he's a young dad. So if
So
we
how much?
literally, if we could hire him to work part-time, just him, he would do it for $2,500 a month.
So what's that total? Like just as a number so we could understand a number.
If everybody that's in this room on this call, right now, made a monthly donation of, what would that be? $30. If everybody made a monthly donation commitment of $30, that would create like a recurrent basis that would allow every single time we send something that the copy editing will come out, the video editing will come out, and that we don't have a week-long turnaround time between me slaying the Democrats at SEIU. Do you know that the reason why we got the YouTube video up at all is because I have music production equipment. Chris and Bobby recorded it, and despite the fact that it's just snuck in audio, that I was able to use my Ableton, music production software to enhance the audio enough so that you can hear it. It's still not great audio, but that's not the candidate's job.
No, I get it. I'm just trying to get the number so we can
That's
actually
exactly
make
it.
this happen for you.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you, Tyler. I
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much.
No, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Ugbak, go ahead.
السلام عليكم دكتور بلال.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
May Allah bless you and bless all the work that you are doing with the team, Ya Rabbil Alameen. May Allah make it come into the light and expand all over, Ya Rabbil Alameen. I have a reflection since yesterday's and today's talk about the liberation and the culture. I
Yes.
think we should believe and we should be proud of our ancestor, where we came from.
Yes.
Because if we don't know who we are, if we are not proud of that, if we deny it, how we can create a community believing in the faith, how we can have that strong spiritual foundation and strong morals. If the plant is not rooted firmly in faith, believing in what we do, believing who we are, and instead of saying, I'm American or I'm Canadian, I'm English, where I came from.
Where do you come
I'm
from?
from Africa. We're from Africa. Be proud of your country. Say out loud why you are shy. Sayings like, I was born here. My parents are from there. I am, to be honest, before getting exposed to your teachings like years ago, I was not like, because I was not informed of my history. I didn't know about my history that much. I'm from Somalia, by the way. I didn't know about my history that much because it's hidden and the people are not talking about it, only talking about the politics and the things like that. And I was shy to speak it out loud. And when I came like to the base, like, why am I shy? Just having that confrontation. Why? The strong why will give us the strong how. If I know why I'm doing this, I believe in it, then I will know how I'll bring it into life, how I'm going to cultivate this. Growing strongly, having the approach that I need, having the skills, the experiences to contribute into the organization, to community, to build a strong foundation, strong community. Being educated, if we have faith and we are not educated, we are weak. We will fall short. If we are educated and we don't have firm rooted faith, then we will transgress and we cross the boundaries. We have to be in the middle. We have to have firm root. We have to have knowledge. We have to believe in what we are doing, why we are doing it. We have to believe that we see the outcome of the work that we are doing it, why we are doing it. And I see it, I witness it by believing it. But if I don't believe in it, how am I going to witness it? How I'm going to...
The strong why will give us the strong how. And Ugba, thank you. I mean, so for those that don't know, Ugba has taken all of the spiritual intensive going back to the very beginning, and she was the one that I would invite to recite Quran, for many of the sessions. So what you reminded me of something that should have been part of this conversation from the beginning. So thank you. So, and this is something that's rooted in the West African Sufi tradition. Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, another one of these great movement leaders and scholars, he said, so there, and pardon me for the detour into Quran exegesis, but he's giving an analysis of this particular verse of the Quran that's going to be important for everybody, whether you're Muslim or not. He said, so there's a verse that says, we created humanity in different tongues and colors so that you would know one another. And Shaykh Ibrahim says in response to this Quran verse that what is implied by the verb to know in that verse is to love. We created you in different tongues and in different colors so that you would love one another. And then Shaykh Ibrahim asked this rhetorical question. He said, can a people that hates itself love others? And the answer was no, right? You have to first love your own people. You have to first love yourself before you become capable of loving others, because what will be there instead is a kind of sycophantic imitation of your oppressor when you hate yourself, not love. And it goes back to another saying, a teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said that it is part of the perfection of your faithfulness that you love your people. He said blameworthy tribalism is when you prefer your people whether they're in the right or in the wrong. So all of the universal love starts with self-love, but it starts with a healthy, sound self-love. And it's rooted in the question, which is how can you love your people when you don't know anything about them? How and this, by the way, this goes especially for you white folks out there. What were you before they made whiteness? What were the pieces of you? Like, how can you love yourself when you only know this thing? Right? For me, that's why I had to go live in Africa. That's why I had to learn an African language. I needed to know where my ancestors were before this happened. And so there's so much healing in that kind of reconnection with the past and that cultivation of a sound love for self, which then is the basis for that love for humanity.
May I share one last thing, please?
Please do.
When we have the weapon for liberation, it's going to be strong, and we will be proud of it by our origin. But a strong belief, faith, when we lose our identity, we will have hesitation. But when we have firm root, we will have liberation. So if we are not sure why we are doing it, so and so, I want to do it, but I'm not sure why, then it's going to be hesitation. The ground underneath us, it's shaking because there is no firm root in what I'm doing, because I don't believe in it. I don't see the result of it. But when I have that firm root, faith in it, then we will have the liberation. It all comes about faith. If we believe in it, we can do it. Otherwise,
Sorry, I thought you were going done. Please finish. Sorry.
if we believe in it, we can do it, and we will be ready to manifest and become tools for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doing the work that He assigned us. May I share something? When you mentioned it's like you were not prepared and you never thought of becoming in the politics. SubhanAllah, it's like 5 years ago, I believe, when you started teaching the Islamic teachings. That was the first time. That was preparation from Allah, I believe, for you. And if you were given this opportunity at that time, I don't think that you will accept it because you were not ready for it. So Allah was preparing for you, it's like these years, to do the intensive teaching in firm-rooted faith for the Muslim and spirituality to strengthen them. You gain strength from the people. So you're going to be strengthened by them. Then when this work is going to be offered for you, you're not going to decline it. You will accept it because Allah gave you the tools. Allah show you how to do it. Then you are empowered by the people. So are you going to do it or not? And alhamdulillah, Allah saw you the signs and you are doing it. And now it's like for us to give it back for you because you're giving it a lot. So our rule for people, because you've given it a lot, we have to give back. and we have to spread this message. We have to tell it to the people that we believe in it. If I don't have resources, or I can give the small monthly donation, but I know so and so who can help, or someone who knows someone, we have to do connections, like not to sit here. It's like I cannot do anything, but I know people who can do, then I will reach out to them.
Yep.
That's how we are going to become manifestation to the tools of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah give us victory, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and make us aware of our weaknesses. May Allah give us insight, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and make all this manifested, Ya Rab. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallah feek.
Thank you, Ugbad. I'll just say one thing is that what I learned from studying the lives of people like Nana Asma'u, Sheikh Uthman Danforio's daughter, or Maria Manyas, Sheikh Ibrahim's daughter, who I sat with for a long time, is that those spiritually edified people, and I don't pretend to count myself amongst them, but I do try to learn from them, that they move differently in the world because they knew exactly who they are and why they're here. And that's what allowed them to have little wasted motion. And because they believed in it, they believed in who they are, they know who they are. And that's ultimately what the psychology of liberation is about uncovering what exactly you are, the role that you're supposed to play in this symphony. And that's something that nobody can uncover for you. You will uncover it by doing the work. You will uncover it by doing the work in here, and you will uncover it especially in service to the people doing the work out there in the world. In the community of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, this is called khidma, service. And that's where everybody earns everything, is that in service to the people. So thank you for that. Sonia. And then Daniel, and then Chris. Oh, and Daniel, good to see you, man. Daniel's one of our great organizers in San Diego. Go ahead, Sonia.
Hi, Professor Ware. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for this. You've inspired me incredibly over the past couple of years. I've followed you. You've been incredibly transformative for me. My mom is here with me on this, and my daughter's sitting at the table. So that's the power of Dr. Butch Ware, bringing 3 generations together in revolutionary action. So thank you. And I just wanted to say to the chat really quickly that I'm in Canada, I'm in Vancouver. So if there are people where we can connect with you to help donate, if you could please drop your info in the chat, that would be fantastic. And as a Canadian, I'd love to connect with your team to be able to see how we can volunteer. So we're here. Your brothers and sisters up north, we're ready to help. So I had a thought about what you said earlier, where you said any true revolution will always be rooted in truth. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of the truth struck me, especially this idea of how we've over the last 2 years been watching a genocide being live streamed through our phones, and these layers peeling and the truth emerging organically. We've had very little control over this process. And it's reminded me of the work of Bayo Kobolafe, of how he says that revolutionary action or activism within revolutionary action sometimes reinforces the very systems that we're trying to upend. And so he argues, let it burn down, step out of the way, let something new emerge, let something organic emerge from what we experience within revolution. And so in this context, and circling back to Fanon, I feel like this idea is nuanced in Fanon's work, this idea of a flow. And so I never thought of violence in this context, but violence almost seems like this natural, organic manifestation of that flow. And when we look at history and how it's repeated itself, that concept rhymes. And so, Fanon calls it the rhythm. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
The first thing that I'm reminded of is that we undertake controlled burns so that wildfires don't consume us. That in West African agriculture, you let a field go fallow, you let the nature overtake it again, and then you carefully section it off and you burn it down. so that all of the nutrients and all of that foliage filters into the soil, and what grows out is going to, to be productive and sustainable, and then you're leaving another field fallow during that time. The while um, we never pray for violence as the outcome. Sometimes we know that it's going to be an inevitable consequence of of efforts of resistance, because the power that is being exercised against us is inherently violent in nature. Fanon strips that down and makes it an inescapable conclusion. So then the question becomes, how do you section off your field so that the fire doesn't consume everything? Because that is what has happened time and time again. That's part of what I heard Art warning against us against yesterday, is that once the weapons are unsheathed, then weapons start to act according to their own logic. And we need a controlled burn, not just a wildfire. When I had those conversations with Seiko Oding, and actually Jason was there for another one with Aaron Dixon, the Seattle Black Panther captain, who was deputized directly by Huey P. Newton. I asked him this question because I had heard Seiko Odinga, Black Liberation Army, who freed Assata Shakur, say something similar. So I wanted to ask Aaron about this. I said, do you feel like some of the brothers back in your time were too quick to reach for the peace? He said, of course. He said, because they were traumatized and had come up in traumatized environments and just wanted to shoot back. There were so many times where somebody fired off a shot that caused an escalation in the situation, and it wasn't strategically or tactically beneficial. So yes, sometimes the fire will need to burn. Yes, sometimes it will have to be all torn down, but do not approach, and this is just taking us back to where we started, do not approach revolution as the end. Approach liberation as the end, and revolution is just the means. We already see things burning. The violence is going to take organized resistance to the violence. That's why direct action is so important. But in the end, it's about a disposition towards struggle. And that disposition towards struggle is prioritizing mercy and compassion in every single engagement. One of the biggest differences I feel is that I personally believe that we need to be providing an off-ramp for white supremacists. We need to be providing a transcendent narrative of healing that is for oppressor and oppressed. That's why I'm always reminding white people that they weren't always white. And that is about a disposition. And it's about an orientation towards the struggle. Yeah, fighting is necessary, but we only do it when it's necessary, not at any other time. I got Daniel and then Chris.
Hey y'all, can you hear me?
Yes.
As always, it's a pleasure to be in community with everybody, taking in all these lessons and sitting together, getting engaged, getting informed. It's been great. And throughout it all, I've had a lot of thoughts and a couple questions, of course, kind of pop up here and there. So I'll do my best to try and put them all into, something a little bit succinct. So we started talking about culture and how our culture has been, largely corrupted or decimated, infiltrated by, capitalist imperialist powers. And we also were talking about liberation and how that liberation is going to have to come from the masses, from those who are oppressed. So when we talk about Palestinian liberation, it's not going to come from the white saviors of the Western world. It's going to come from Palestinians. And same goes for every, liberation movement. And to me, I think thinking about what it means to be in solidarity, what it means to be sort of in allyship, I think it's one, important to trust the masses, to bring about their own, liberation and revolution through revolutionary struggle and build upon the ashes of capitalism, imperialism, and all those forces that are keeping folks down. But I think part of that, maybe to add a bit of nuance, is realizing how, because the culture has like so infiltrated, the masses' understanding of how to achieve the liberation, sort of putting different falsities or false ideas in people's minds of what can be possible or through what means would actually bring about the liberation. I guess this is more so commentary of, the role of revolutionaries within their own movements, and actually the role of folks in solidarity and allyship to enhance those voices which, have a concrete understanding and are doing the work to build about the movements that will bring about liberation. Because I feel like sometimes if you just, take, ideas that may be held by a lot of people within a certain, community, for example, anybody who voted for the Democrats, of some form of, ethnic background, if you just take that idea at face value as a representation for, the strategies of what it means to work towards, our collective liberation, I think you're doing a disservice to, the masses. But at the same time, if you then just come around, start talking down to people like you don't know shit about X, Y, and Z, you didn't read this book, that book, it's a matter of, enhancing sort of the people who've like, everybody has a voice within, a role and to find their voice, but sometimes you got to point people towards voices within people's own communities who've already, will better be a messenger for, what needs to be heard. So I think just thinking about, moving forward, how we engage with, either the campaign or building up movements in general, just kind of having that humility and strategy to be able to know how to integrate with, the masses and how to push these liberation ideologies forward, because, and also like what was being brought in with, I believe, Drew earlier, how we can tie our own stories towards, pushing that narrative of collective liberation, because that's what we're working towards, is collective liberation, not just for one group or the other, but, it's all tied together. So I was trying to see if there was a question to be formed in there, but I think I was mostly just kind of rambling.
You gave me great. No, you didn't. You gave me great prompts. So it didn't need to be a question. I'm a professor, and I often have prompts that aren't questions. So you gave a lot of great prompts. So here's the first set of things that come to my heart. With this last part, Huey P. Newton said, "I dissuade party members from putting down people who do not understand. Even people who are unenlightened and seemingly bourgeois should be answered in a polite way. Things should be explained to them as fully as possible. I was turned off by a person who didn't want to talk to me because I was not important enough. Um, they just wanted to preach to the converted, whoever already agreed with them. I try to be cordial because that way you win people over. You cannot win them over by drawing the line of demarcation, saying you are on this side and I'm on the other. That shows a lack of consciousness. After the Black Panther Party was formed, I almost fell into this error. I could not understand why people were blind to what I saw so clearly. Then I realized that their understanding had to be developed." That's Huey P. Newton. Malcolm, as was characteristic, had a very short way of putting a complex idea. He said, "Do not be in a hurry to condemn. There was a day that you did not know that which you know today." This is about a disposition. Who Jason will remind me who said, "Be kind to people and ruthless to systems," right? Type it in the chat because I always be forgetting. But that's the idea, is that, yeah, Michael Brooks, be kind to people and ruthless to systems. Remember that you didn't always know everything either, and that you needed to be taught, and understanding needed to be cultivated. And people do not listen to arrogant people. If you have istikbal, arrogance, or pride on you, nobody wants to hear anything you have to say. So, like, come at people from a place of humility, listen to them, and then speak in a language that they understand. Like, the part about like they haven't read this theory or that theory, it is the job of teachers to put it into a language that anybody can understand. Quran says, never did we send a messenger except in the language of the people. And it's through communicating with people in the register that makes sense to them. That's how you sketch out collective liberation. That's how you cultivate solidarity. So I'll close the response with Fred, Chairman Fred. He said, uh, we don't believe that you fight fire with fire best. We believe you fight fire with water best. We're not going to fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. That's not the negation of our experience. That's the embrace of our experience. It's not identity politics. Identity politics is rooted in people who are insecure about who they are and need to have their identities validated by others. That's exactly the group that Sheikh Ibrahim was talking about, a group of people that hate themselves and therefore can't love anyone else. People that are secure in their identity and know who they are and know their stories can receive from any and everyone because they are rooted in their authentic selves, and therefore whatever fruit that they harvest from somebody else's tree that is of benefit does not disturb them in the least. If you're comfortable in your own skin and you know who you are, then you are comfortable learning from anyone. And that is where the collective liberation and the solidarity comes from. It means that a Muslim, a believing Muslim, a traditional Muslim, you know, if they are so insecure that they can't learn something from gay rights movements, then you've missed the point. And vice versa. That if you are comfortable in your own skin and you know who you are, then you understand that there are lessons to be learned from all of our experiences. And that's where the collective liberation and solidarity comes in. That's where having the audacity and the self-love to tell your own story, but also having that we vision and that collective vision that you listen when other people are telling their story too. And ultimately, for me, all of this is just rooted in love. It's rooted in having a baseline love for human beings, and including like yourself amongst those human beings that you love, like not having that internalized self-hatred, which is maybe the number one psychological outcome of capitalism and colonialism, is that it causes us to internalize that self-hatred, because that self-hatred is so disempowering us. To us, it makes us so easily manipulable. Last question from Chris. We're at 2.5 hours. So this is in 3 minutes, we'll be at 2.5 hours. And that'll be definitely the end. Oh, Jason put in the chat, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, the true revolutionary is guided by feelings of great love. Yeah, Che, it was not ridiculous at all. Asada Shakur said the same thing. You know, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba said a version of the same thing, like that the entirety of the affair is love. The entirety of it, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, sorry, let me just press that button again.
Thank you. Wanted to share the idea that this is our revolution, and Dr. Butchware is our vessel. I'm not sure that he's as self-determined as he would have you believe. Regardless, thank you for the seminar, and thank you for answering our call. I wanted to ask you if you are familiar with the author and Professor Kim Stanley Robinson and his Mars trilogy.
No. Tell me.
Well, I'm on the third volume of this. It's a very long, very in-depth love letter to revolution and how this might really take place and all that would be involved with it, all the aspects and all the complications of it. If anyone is interested in exploring that, I definitely recommend that they look into this.
And this is sorry, just to clarify, it's fictional or
this is fictional. This
ooh,
is fictional.
so hold on before you continue. Low key, like a fiction version for the book club, like where we do, like I would love to get introduced to Kim Stanley Robinson. I would love for y'all to read some Octavia Butler if you haven't already. So I'm just putting that out into the universe in case somebody wants to do something with it. Please continue, Chris, and apologies for the interruption.
Well, I know we're close to time, and but I would definitely recommend the Mars trilogy from Kim Stanley Robinson for anyone who wants to explore revolution and what that will entail in our future. I really feel that from reading it that the use of Mars as a setting for the novel is really a vehicle for exploring what revolution in California would look like. I think that's a great thing with science fiction is you can kind of play around with things we're familiar with to explore things we haven't imagined. And then the one last point I'd like to point out is the trilogy, the story, it begins in 2026.
It's a little spot on. Okay, so I will receive that, and I actually think that this is a great place for us to end. We started with Bamba's poetry as the core of a revolutionary cultural movement, and we end with fiction. And at different points in time, we discuss music. So Emmanuel Solas, who's one of our volunteers here in the 805, he started something called Creatives for Butch. So this is where if you're a creative of any kind, you should register. I think that we have that on the Mighty Networks, but we can make sure that people get that link. But I think that the short-term, practical, tangible response is to, to start that conversation about fiction, to start that conversation about poetry, to start that arts and culture conversation somewhere. And that could be as easy as a fiction, as a fiction book club that to get it kicked off. But when you talk about doing the cultural work, like you immediately have to start by doing the cultural work. So thank you for that. And reading science fiction was what I always did at finals time when I didn't want to study. So I would often take on, like new science fiction reading when I was supposed to be studying for exams. So I would love to have that be something that I read on a flight up to Sacramento before an interview. The last thing that I'll say, while kind of endorsing this idea that we get a book, a fiction club, and poetry and cultural conversation going, is I'll just respond to what you said before. You said that may God, who knows my faults, make me the measure of the best that y'all see in me. I don't. Anybody that knows me knows that I would rather just be kicking it at home with my wife and reading books. I know that I, like seem like somebody that is extroverted and likes to talk. I grew up with a like really, really bad like social anxiety disorder and, still, you know, don't quite know how I ended up here. Um, and so I can't promise, anything to you guys except that you're going to get my very best effort to try to deliver on whatever hope and energy that you invest in this movement. And that I will never take it for granted. I will never take advantage of your trust. I will never seek to transform it into something that's about me because it's not about me. And there are going to be times when I have to, to play a leadership role, but I would rather be, a teammate than just the leader. That would be my preference. But I can tell you this is that I will always fight. I will never quit. Now that I've been tagged into this fight, you can count on me to fight and you can count on me to not quit. Those two things for sure you can count on. I will keep punching, and and I'm going to get punched, and I will take a punch, and I will get right back up and throw more punches. And if may God give us good health and long life, but to stop me when we've come this far, you can't do that while I'm still drawing breath. I'm going to keep punching. So if that's something that that you're willing to support, then support it, and we're gonna go far. We are gonna go far. Because victory is written. It's gonna come at somebody's hand, it's gonna come in some moment. Why not ours? Why not now? Love y'all. Um, inshallah, we'll see you soon. We'll figure out what the next Roots of Revolution lesson is going to be. I mean, we'll definitely get that fiction book club. Chris, if we can put off the trilogy until the second month and start with Octavia Butler, just so I don't have to read something new right now while I got so many other things going on. But I definitely want to do it, the next month, Lord willing. So, all right, salam alaikum, y'all. Peace and blessings to you all.